ዓላማው ምንድን ነው? how to sell Ethiopia to investors ነው። okay so if you don't mind ፕሬዘንቴሽኑ በእንግሊዝኛ ስለሆነ የተጻፈው በተቻለ መጠን እንግሊዝኛ የደባለቅ ወይም majority of my presentation will be in English. So as you can see, investing in Ethiopia ይልንና a dynamic, fast-growing, large emerging African economy ነው headline ራሱ. So part of the idea this morning is how to sell በየኤምባሲው በምትሄዱበት ቦታ wherever you're assigned, how you can communicate with investors for them to come and invest in Ethiopia ከሚል ነው የተዘጋጀ ይሄ document. Okay? So this is exactly what we do. I run a Washington-based investment firm, a private equity firm. So we spend a lot of time meeting investors, trying to sell them on Africa, of course, but more particularly what's near and dear to my heart is Ethiopia. So from the way the slides are prepared to the way you communicate matters. And the way you should approach this is think like an investor. Okay? What would an investor want to hear? እኔ እንደው ቢያንስ 100 የሚሆን የአገሮች የኢንቨስትመንት ፕሮሞሽን presentation attend አድርጌያለሁ. They all sell their country the same way. ስለዚህ differentiate የሚያደርገንን ማሳየት መቻል አለብን. Now, the first thing you do, as I said, a salesman, you know what an elevator pitch is? An elevator pitch is you have to sell your ideas very, very quickly to important people. So the way I do it here, it's like I give them the big, exciting things about Ethiopia መጀመሪያ. So we call it Ethiopia at a glance. Okay? It's 3-4 slides, big things that we have accomplished, at least, by the way, most investors, even very sophisticated investors, know very little about Ethiopia. So you have to start from the assumption that they really don't have much time, they don't know much about this country, so wow them before you go into the details. Just, wow, I didn't know የሚሉትን አደርጋለሁ። ስለዚህ ኢትዮጵያ at a glance ነው እንደ ጉራ እንበለው ግን based on facts. Okay? So we are the diplomatic capital of Africa ስንል what does it mean? ይገርማቸዋል. I mean, there's a reason. አይደለም ይሄ እውነት ነው. Now we say that ከ110 በላይ ነው የሚል ዴታ አለን። ወደ 130 ዲፕሎማቲክ ሚሽኖች ኢትዮጵያ ውስጥ አሉ የሚለውን ማሳየቱ ራሱ. And look what we do. We compare ourselves to whom? To Washington and to Brussels. Right? So now we've elevated ourselves based on facts. It's true. ይሄንን ግን believe me, even the most sophisticated analysts don't know that. People who spend time looking at Africa, looking at even at Ethiopia, they're surprised to see this. Okay? Then what do we do? Size matters. We're a big country ስንል ምን ማለት ነው? ትልቅ አገር ነው ስንል ብዙ ትርጉም አለው። እኛ ለኢንቨስተሮች በመነሳይበት ጊዜ ግን ለአንድ ሳይዙ ኢትዮጵያ ምንድን ነው የሚለው ማሳየቱ ራሱ it has significance. By the way, when you prepare this kinds of presentation, you have to tailor it to the audience. ይሄ ማሳየቱ ዛሬ a bit generic ነው. It's actually out of a presentation I gave in Sao Paulo, Brazil, not too long ago. Actually, a lot of it was in Portuguese. We sanitized it for English. But we do this in the US. Okay? When I do this in the US, I customize it to show the size of Ethiopia compared to some big US states like California or Texas. But when we give this to the Europeans, we want, okay, but GDP, ከነሱ ጋር compare ማድረግ ባልንችልም, we beat them on size. Okay? We're actually bigger than France and Spain combined. Get that? We're bigger than France and Spain combined. Okay? Our MC was based in France. You know how big France is, right? You drive from the north to the south, it's 10 hours drive, right? To go down to the Côte d'Azur. Spainንም ጨምሮ እኛ እንበልጣቸዋለን. So you need to show this, that how big we are. ከዛ በኋላስ how large our population is. Population matters plenty, especially in certain industries, fast-moving consumer goods, big businesses that thrive on large volumes of consumers, they like this number. 117 million ስንለው wow ይላል. Okay, I'll show you another graph which connects the population to purchasing power. ከአፍሪካ ሁለተኛ ነን ስንለው they pay attention. Only Nigeria is bigger than us. Don't underestimate the importance of these, what we take for granted these facts, but for investors, these are markers. These are connecting dots that they need to know. On the right, there's a graph. You may not be able to see it. I actually recently tweeted this graph. I found it from some institution that did this. These are the top 10 countries by population today and at the end of the century. At the end of the century, Ethiopia will be amongst the 10 largest, most populous countries in the world. And I use population as a proxy for influence, economic influence and political influence. Okay? So we will be amongst the top 10. ከ117 million, by the way, 117 million in 22 years will be 180 million people. Now I have to tell you, amongst friends, amongst family here, we're very busy people replicating. I think we need to slow down. Okay? A little bit, huh? But that being what it is power. All the big countries today have large population, and we're one of them. And that's something you need to emphasize as you give a presentation. Now, I just landed on this beautiful airline. It's the only country in Africa where you don't have to think about is there a flight. I do a lot of airline deals, as some of you might know. This is something you need to put in the front of your slide when you talk about Ethiopia. Every airline in Africa is bankrupt today. Every single one of them. There's not one viable. South African Airways stopped flying. Stopped flying literally, because I know we bid to buy it a couple months ago. To buy South African Airways, our firm is not flying. The most industrialized economy in Africa does not have an airline. Okay? Kenya Airways has been in bankruptcy. It's about to be officially nationalized by the government of Kenya. In fact, they're replicating the Ethiopian model. State-owned. Airportunum መንግስት እየወሰደው ነው. And yet, guess what? The only profitable airline in the world in 2020 was Ethiopian Airlines. The only major airline in the world that did not get a bailout last year is Ethiopian Airlines. The only one. Lufthansa got bailed out. Emirates got bailed out. Every single airline in the United States got a bailout, $52 billion. And yet, this by proxy, Ethiopian promote እያደረግን ነው ማለት ነው. You follow me? This is very important. The wow የሚለው ይሄን ነው. At a glance ብዬ ዲቴል የምሰጣችሁ before I go into the details ለማለት ነው. This is our pride and joy. I have to be honest. You've seen my tweets. I've been a big defender of Ethiopian Airlines. There are some out there, for their own interest, who have been trying to undermine our national airline. But this airline speaks with success, with numbers. Yesterday, when I flew, the flight was full from Washington, completely. There was not a single empty seat from Washington. From Africa, nobody flies to America anymore. KQ used to fly to JFK maybe once a week now or something. South African Airways doesn't. We are the only one allowed by the Americans to fly to 4 cities in the United States. So here, by proxy, እኛንም ሀገራችንን ፕሮሞት የሚያደርግ ነገር ነው. We build successful institutions, capacity አለን ማለት ነው. Guess what? 100% owned, 100% run by Ethiopians. 100%. ለሌላው ለምናወራው we're building a big economy ለሚለውም a reference point ነው. If you can build one of the most successful airlines in the world, okay? So Ethiopia Airlines now. And this is another thing. The world's largest flour exporting company is based in Ethiopia. It's the biggest flour exporting company in the world. You see, we're connecting the dots. We're building institutions, we're building big things in Milonem, በስራ እያሳየን ነው. We're not going to gloss over the challenges that we face. We'll talk about that in a moment. When we talk about banking, I think Dr. Yu talked about a lot of the reforms that the government is putting in place in the financial service sector. Guess what? Amongst the largest banks in Africa is the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia. We can discuss about efficiency and other things. That's what the reform is all about. But the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia is bigger than the 4 biggest banks in Kenya combined. Combined. Most people don't know this. Okay? So we are a big country. We're on the move. Things are changing. Sinnen with data. Now, bunnachin nalalan, of course, sumbion, the best coffees in the world, amongst the top blend. A reference, by the way, sinos didamo, mano validation imisatan. I know this may not. The big companies, Starbucks and Aukeno reference imitagamo. Kinatum, Starbucks says 4.8 out of 5 of their customers say Ethiopian coffee is the best kalu. Guess what? That's a key selling point. So, wow factor no. Now, this other one, listen, it's more like to show what we've done. Africa is the only country that owns its own shipping line is Ethiopia. Even the South Africans sold their shipping lines. Okay? Now, there's a lot of debate how to do it here in Ethiopia. Should it be I think opening up is a good thing, but it shows because they tell us we're landlocked, and yet we have the largest merchant fleet in Africa. So listen, you get my drift, right? Where we're going with all these stories. This is just at a glance in Milan. I'll come to the details in a few seconds because I don't have a whole lot of time. We have the largest livestock in Africa. So an investor who wants to go into that sector, okay, so this is what the wow factor lamaasayet. That we have big institutions, we have the capacity የሚለውንም ለማሳየትና ለማያውቁት ቶሎ እንዲያውቁ ነው። ይሄን ካልኩ በኋላ በቶሎ in the next say 6-7 minutes I'll tell you what we tell investors. By the way, when you give presentations you have to be very succinct, to the point, and show facts. Okay? So what we do is the top 10 reasons for investing in Ethiopia, doing business in Ethiopia, የምትላለችን የመጀመሪያው of course, why would I invest in Ethiopia? It's like the economy. No. What about the economy? Well, listen, I'm a regular panelist on CNBC የሚባል television network አለ በወር ሁለቴ appear አደርጋለሁ. I'm also a very regular panelist on the BBC. So whenever they ask me to appear on these programs, that አንድ ሰዓት ኢንተርቪው አድርገን 3 ደቂቃ ቲቪ ላይ የምትወጣው። ስለዚህ I learned from them that I better be to the point. Imagination capture magic. So what about the Ethiopian economy? We're the 3rd largest economy in sub-Saharan Africa, period. Both in nominal GDP, depending on the exchange rate, sometimes Kenya ትንሽ ይበልጣል. But in PPP, purchasing power parity, we're not even close. Kenya is not even close. So, for investors, size matters. The size of the GDP matters. ይህንን emphasize አድርጉ. We're the 3rd largest. It's a fact. It's not a made-up story. It's a fact. We were nowhere to be found 20 years ago, but we're there now. I think Dr. Yu made very good, valid points. We had some challenges 3-4 years ago. If it wasn't fixed, we would have had a much different scenario than today. ይህንን ሰስቴን አድርገን በዚሁ ለመቀጠል ሪፎርሙ ይመጣል ማለት ነው። Okay? So the 3rd largest የምትለዋን አትርሱ. By the way, we'll distribute these slides ለእናንተም እንድትጠቀሙበት. This is where we came from the 1980s, a basket case of an economy, a country, በደርግ ጊዜ ጀምሮ. The 2000s were good years, growth, unmistakable growth, yes, challenges as well, but growth, the fastest growing economy. We need to emphasize that as well. We were, by IMF, by World Bank, by anybody's measurement, Ethiopia was the fastest growing economy for 10 years in a row in Africa. But it couldn't sustain it had the reforms not taken place. That also you need to emphasize, okay? Going forward, the same thing, the 10-year perspective plan and all that will show that. One of the things we show, of course, investor ምንድነው የሚለው okay, ያደገ ነው, purchasing power here, per capita GDP የሚለው ግን is important. It's a bit tricky. ያደገ ነው, absolute per capita GDP $1,000 አሁን $1,000 ነው. In double digit እያደገም ቢሆን you have to be honest and say it's still compared to its potential it's low. ግን እያደገ ነው የሚለውን ማሳየት አለባቸው። ምክንያቱም they can google it very easily and find out what our per capita GDP is. We just have to show it has grown rapidly and it's going to continue. Poverty ቅድምም ተብሏል. Ethiopia has done actually extremely well compared to much of Africa. Its poverty level, now Africa of course data is hard to come by, very reliable, but based on what we have, Ethiopia's poverty level is lower than the Africa average. Again, it's an indicator for an investor that progress is being made. And then what happened? All these good things that we showed you, it has to be, I remember this whole presentation is about FDI, right? Guess what? የኢአይሲም CEO እዚህ ያለ they've done a fantastic job, okay? Despite the challenges, despite COVID, despite some of the global issues that we see, 3.9 billion this past year. Yes, I think 850 ከቮዳፎን ያመጣሽው ነው አይደል? Even if we take that out, it's 3.2 billion. If you look at the UNCTAD annual report for the last 4 years, we were amongst the 5 top FDI destinations in Africa. UNCTAD ማለት ይሄውን የሚያመጣው ነው። Okay? እሱን ሳይት አድርጎ. By the way, when you cite data, just to tell you, investors ከመንግስቶች any government የሚሰጣቸውን data discount ያደርጋሉ. It is normal. I mean, because governments have, whether it's the US government or any government, they have their own angle. But when you match what you get from UN, IMF, World Bank, what Dr. Ayub tells you, and you match those, then it gives it credibility. That's what we tend to do, okay? So, based on that, almost $4 billion last year, Ethiopia, FDI, agintalech. Globally, FDI was significantly lower. In some countries up to 40%. In Africa, the same thing. Okay? So FDI. Now, ይሄ ሁሉ እንግዲህ ቅድም ዶክተር ኢዮብ እንዳለው ብዙ ሪፎርም እየተደረገ ነው. And there's the factual, which you have to show, but investors are forward looking. That's what you have to keep in mind. Historical data is to give it background. This is what you need to show them, that there's a lot of reform in progress. የምትጠየቁ ጥያቄ ይኖራል. እኛ የምንጠየቀው ልንገራችሁና so you're prepared. Forex is the top question you get asked. የውጭ ምንዛሪን በተመለከተ በቃ every investor invest ሲያደርግ can I get my money out ነው የሚለው በኋላ dividend ቃለ መግዛ ምናምን ቅድም ዶክተር ኢዮብ ያለውን ነው መመለስ ያለባቸው. The government is migrating towards a market driven exchange rate በአንድ በኩል. Secondly, eventually the market will open up, of course. But secondly, the imbalance that we see today, I'll use Dr. Iyob's word, foreign exchange shortage is not going to be a permanent feature of the Ethiopian economy. ብላችሁ ማስረዳት አለባችሁ. ዛሬ ያለውን deny ማድረግ አይቻልም. It's a fact. They're smart. They know. But what's in the works የሚለው ነው. That's what you need to focus on. Forex የማይቀር ጥያቄ ነው. There's a big deal we're currently working on. I can tell you, the analysts, the M&A team leaders, model እየሰሩ ነው. Forex exchange-ን በተመለከተ የኢትዮጵያን risk factor elevate ያደርገዋል. እኛ ይሄንን ነው የምንለው. It's not going to be a permanent feature. ለምን? ኤክስፖርት እየጨመረ ነው, ኢምፖርት እየቀነሰ ነው. ይሄ will reduce the pressure on the foreign exchange shortage የሚለው ማስረዳት. ይሄን ካላስረዳችሁ ምንም አይነት explanation እንደዚህ ሮዝ የሆነ ፒክቸር ይሄ ሁሉ ኦፖርቹኒቲ ያለ ብላ ገንዘቤ ማውጣት ማልችልበት ሀገር ኢንቨስት አላደርግም ማለት ኖርማል ነው ለኢንቨስተሮች. Even those who do investments in emerging markets like Ethiopia. Macroeconomic stability በጣም ኪ ጥያቄ የሚጠይቁ ኢንፍሌሽንን ሌሎች ስለዚህ ቅድም ዶክተር ኢዮብ የሰጠውን ስላይዶች አሰባስቡና be ready to answer these questions. መጠየቁ ማይቀር ነው። አሁን ስላለው ሁኔታ frankly speaking, the smart investors we tell them, and they also know, they look beyond the here and now. This is how investors look. ዛሬ ያለው exceptional የሆነ situation መሆኑን ሁሉም ያውቃሉ። ጦርነት ይቆማል፣ ያለው challenge ይቆማል፣ እሱን ያውቃሉ. Because they don't come here to flip assets overnight. They're long-term strategic investors. ስለዚህ you need to focus on showing them the long-term trends, and then you win their confidence.